Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Sachs from Cornell Cooperative Extension, and I've set up this Zoom tonight with our guest speaker, Dr. Keith Tidball. And I would ask you to please mute yourselves during his presentation. There will be plenty of time for questions and answers afterward. And I'm doing this in coordination with our Westchester Agriculture and Farmland Protection Board. And some of the members of the board are present. In fact, our board president, Patty Peckham, is on the Zoom. And without further ado, I'd like to get started. I'll just introduce briefly. Dr. Keith Tidball has a background in emergency management, and he worked with the agricultural community for many, many years. He's part of Cornell University, and he's affiliated with the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. He's also the head of the Eden System, which is the Extension Disaster Education Network, and he'll be talking about that a little bit later. Keith has been active also with the military, and Keith, I think you still are, right? You're the head of something, a very impressive title. I forgot what it was. But suffice it to say, he knows his stuff. And we're very happy that he was able to join us tonight from Ithaca. And luckily it's by Zoom, because I think Ithaca is about to get a lot of snow. But again, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Keith Tidball.
Thank you very much, Barbara. It's really a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy an opportunity to come, in this case virtually, and speak with my colleagues in cooperative extension in the counties, especially Westchester County. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank all of you who have decided to spend your next hour or so with us. Thank you for being here tonight. As Barbara said, I am at Cornell University in the Department of Natural Resources and Environment. I am a social scientist by training. I've been at Cornell about 20 years. The very first year I was at Cornell, though, I was in cooperative extension as a county natural resources and agriculture program leader in Ontario County. And prior to that, I was in the United States Department of Agriculture's Foreign Ag Service doing work around disaster and emergency response, preparedness, and so forth in the agricultural sector. So this is an area that I'll be speaking of tonight that's very near and dear to my heart. Barbara did also mention my prior and current military service. I'm in the New York Guard. I am the G3 for the New York Guard, which is the Plans and Operations Officer for the General Staff. And I've been deployed a number of times in disaster contexts where I am fortunate to be able to talk about my experience in the ag and natural resource sector in order to bring those issues to bear where they might not otherwise. But we'll have a chance to maybe delve a little more deeply into sort of examples of disaster management and disaster preparedness in the context of ag and natural resources, hopefully from some of you and your experiences. But what I'd like to do first is just get a sense of who you all are without taking a ton of time. I see there's probably, I don't know, there's less than a dozen here on the call. So that seems like we should be able to take 30 seconds to introduce ourselves each without chewing into the time too much. So I'm just going to play a little game of, it's kind of like Wheel of Fortune or something. I've got Lindy Scorsoni up first on my window. Would you mind introducing yourself? And I'll just kind of call out names as we go along the screens here.
All right. Hi. Yeah, I have just a little 5-acre horse farm in Chester, New York, in Orange County, and I just have 4 horses that I keep here. And I've had horses my whole life. I actually grew up in Ithaca, but my dad taught at Cornell too. So, but anyway, I've been very lucky. I have not had any disasters up here. I do have a generator because I'm on a well, and the main thing I was concerned with is losing water, in case of an emergency. And there have been, I guess it was one of the hurricanes, or some farms just around the corner from me right after I'd moved in 3 weeks ago. I bought the farm in 2012, so they were out for 10 days. So that sort of gave me said I'm going to put the generator in, and it's only been needed for maybe an hour or two for like small things, but
Well,
that's
very
the
nice to
main-
meet you, Lindy. I hope
Okay.
hope you find something that's useful this
Okay.
evening.
All right.
Next, I have Bree or Bry. Bry, you look like you're on mute.
Hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Bry Hart, White Oak Farm here in Yorktown. We are a 2,400 tap maple producer. Actually, we're the only commercial producer in Westchester. And we have had our share of problems with emergencies. We lost $25,000 worth of syrup a couple of years ago, and we had a 14-day power outage. Couldn't run our ROs, couldn't run our pumps. So we do no emergencies here.
Yeah. And generators. Now.
And we have a massive generator now.
Thanks. Nice to meet you. Jan Blair.
Hi there. I chair the Soil and Water Conservation District Board for Westchester, and I'm on the Watershed Ag Council, and I am on this board. And I also have a farm in Vermont. I am a farmer, but it's a horse farmer, and we have hay and horses. And so, but Vermont is Vermont, but I live in New York. I live in Irvington, New York. I've been active. I've lived in Irvington, New York for about 40 years. So agriculture is really near and dear to my heart. And so I'm on this board because of what I do. And I'm involved with environmental organizations and land preservation for agriculture.
Great. We appreciate your hard work in all of those areas, and nice to meet you, Jan.
Thank you.
Next, I have Lida.
Yeah, hi. I'm on the Westchester Ag Board of the Secretary. I'm also on the committee for the Watershed Ag Council. And I have an alpaca farm in Yorktown Heights, New York, with alpacas and Icelandic horses and donkeys.
Cool. Very interesting. Thanks for
And
being
we've
here
just
tonight.
recently solarized our farm. We put solar panels on our main barn to run the farm.
Nice. Very nice. Very, very nice to meet you. And always interested in alternative livestock, alpaca in particular. Fascinating. So thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Next, I have David.
Hi, everybody. Dave Kaminga. I'm with the Director of Environmental Planning for Westchester County. We administer or provide support to the county's Agriculture and Farmland Protection Board. And we also work, we're currently actually working very closely with our Office of Emergency Management on a countywide hazard mitigation plan. So this is a nice crossover with that. Municipalities will be adopting that plan hopefully in the next week or two, so that they'll be eligible for BRIC funding. And we're working, hopefully bring some of that information and federal funding to our farmers.
Yeah, important work. Appreciate that, David. There'll be some information later in my presentation about emergency support function in 11 and our role with that at Cornell and Eden that I think you'll find interesting. So I appreciate you being here. Next, I've got Victor Mallison.
Yeah, my name is Vic Mallison. I am on the Agriculture Board as an ad hoc member because of my position as the Executive Director of the Westchester Tax Commission, and here to lend any support that I can to members of the agricultural community in Westchester County to make sure we're all getting all of the exemptions we need and advocacy for any other real property related issues.
Great. Well, thanks for being here, Vic. Appreciate that. And appreciate that work in the area of assessment and so forth. That's always greatly appreciated. Next, I've got Michael Dignelli.
Hi, Michael Dignelli. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm a member of the Westchester County Agricultural and Farmland Protection Board for 22 years. I'm a former member of the Watershed Agricultural Council for 16 years. I own and operate a horse farm with my brother in Katona, Somers area, and I've owned it for 27 years. So I have seen some weather events that have caused challenges in managing livestock when there's no power, like Superstorm Sandy, managing the generators, handling a large number of horses when power is out for multiple days and things of that nature. So I'm particularly interested in in your seminar today.
Great. Well, thanks for being here tonight, and I really appreciate you your insights. I especially like your painting of the horse or photograph behind you there.
Oh,
That's
my head.
yes, that's good.
Okay.
Next, I think I have Randall Pratt.
Yes, hi, my name's Randy Pratt. I have a owner of Wilkins Fruit and Fur Farm in Yorktown Heights. We grow peaches, apples, pumpkins, Christmas trees, and wine grapes. We run most of it through a pick your own operation. We have a winery, a bake shop, and a farm market. Cider mill as well, and cold storage, which is when the
Oh, very
power is out
diverse.
is a problem.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the diverse value-added program you've got going there, and hopefully you'll hear something tonight that's useful, or at least become aware of some additional resources that you might be able to take advantage of, especially with the cold storage needs that you have there and so forth. Grace Ott.
Hi, everyone. I just started last week with CCE of Orange County. I'm the forage livestock, dairy, and equine educator. So I thought this would be really beneficial to listen to because, livestock people, or dairies, when disaster happens, they definitely need help.
Absolutely. Well, welcome aboard to CCE, and hopefully also welcome aboard to New York Eden and the Eden system more broadly nationally. Next, I have Steve Cole.
Yes, I'm actually Lita's husband. I'm a co-owner of an alpaca farm here in Yorktown Heights. As a child recently saw me in town, pointed out to her mother, said, "Oh, look, there's Lita's man."
Awesome.
I'm also a research psychologist, faculty at Emory University in research design and statistical analysis, and I'm on the SARE technical committee for farmer grants.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That SARE program is, how we started our farm 25 years ago. So or 22 years ago. So happy to meet somebody involved with that program. And thanks for being here tonight. Hopefully you'll find something of interest. I see two more. I have Patricia Peckham.
Hi, I'm chair of the Westchester County Ag Board, and I have a horse farm, a boarding and training show horse farm in Yorktown Heights, New York. It's actually right across the street from the alpaca farm. And whenever in the beginning, before I got a generator, I would have to go over to Lita's and get some water. But we got a generator. So except for this past week, it's been, I needed some water again, but she's a great neighbor, and we're familiar with managing things through power outages as well. I think 4 months, we bought the farm in 2002, and 4 months into it, an employee of mine was having a romantic dinner with his girlfriend and started a fire in the staff apartments. So fortunately, the people who built the barn originally had a cement block wall, a firewall between the staff apartments and the barn, but it was terrifying. And Yorktown fire people came very quickly and put it out. But yeah, disaster preparedness is really, I really look forward to this presentation. Thank you for agreeing to speak to us.
My pleasure, and nice to meet you, Patricia. I'm glad that your whole barn didn't burn and that you had that firewall there.
Yeah, that was
terrifying indeed. Last person is Lael.
Oh, yes. Hello. I'm just came to listen. I'm a horse owner, and I'm just interested in what your program is about. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Nice to meet you. So I think what I really appreciate meeting all of you this way, and I thank you all for patiently working our way through those introductions. What I'd like to do now is is introduce you to some of the work that we're here to learn more about more broadly before we get into the details of specifically what can you and your operation do in all phases of disaster, not just preparedness, but in all phases. So I think it's important to start at the beginning, which is that I'm from Cornell University, right? So that's a land grant university. Land grant universities have a very important and old history in this country. I think they're probably part of what we would consider the foundations of the United States of America. And Cornell is the land grant for the state of New York. Along with that land grant status comes an agricultural experiment station and also a cooperative extension system, which is, we all understand it, especially in this audience tonight, we all understand that at the very local level, but cooperative extension systems are also state systems and they're national systems, and they interact with other national extension systems, all under the rubric of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture within USDA. So one of the big benefits of your involvement in cooperative extension in Westchester County is that you're actually part of this much broader network that ultimately is influencing and influenced by the policies set forth at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So that's a pretty big deal, and it's an important thing to keep in mind. As was mentioned, I am in the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell. I'm a faculty member that's focused on extension as 50% of my appointment, extension and applied research. And the other 50% of my appointment at Cornell for the last 7 years or so is to be the assistant director of that state Cornell cooperative extension system, specifically in the domain of environment and natural resources and disaster and all hazards management. So I'm very, very happy to share with you now just some broad brush sort of background on what this system actually is. Let me see if I can advance the screen. Yes, so we're talking about Extension Disaster Education Network first and foremost, so that you can understand how you fit in at the local level, at the county level, and more broadly. So the Extension Disaster Education Network is truly a network, an organization of municipalities, municipal organization and institutions, county institutions, state institutions, national institutions. And all of those are together in order to do one thing, and that is to reduce the impact of disasters through education. And we do that by anticipating what future needs you may have. We do that through interdisciplinary and multi-state research and local state-driven research. We do that by disseminating credible and reliable information. And we do that through the deployment of timely and prompt communications. How many of you have, I don't know if I'll be able to see you raise your hands using the Zoom feature. I think I can. How many of you have either seen a New York Eden Facebook post or New York Eden tweet? I see Jan's hands up. Any other hands? There's another one. David has. Great. Well, at least a couple of you have, and by the end of this presentation, more of you will know how to see those in the future. So those are the sort of mission areas for Eden. Membership-wise, as I mentioned, these are land-grant universities and their state cooperative extension systems. We're composed of all of those land-grant and sea-grant institutions. All of those are universities you've heard of. Most of them have something like the name of the state, like Michigan, with state after them. In the case of Cornell, that's not it, but many of them do. There's 106 of those. And then there's 33 additional sea grant institutions. And then there's just a handful, actually only 2 that I'm aware of, that are both land grant and sea grant, and that's Auburn and Cornell. Our sea grant program covers not only our ocean littoral coasts, but also our Great Lake coasts. And then within all of that national membership, there's about 300 delegates that represent their institutions that annually go to the Extension Disaster Education Network annual meeting and set national and regional priorities. So all of the information that you'll experience in Westchester County having to do with Eden is vetted by and is helped by this pretty vast network of expertise at some of the most premier universities in the country and perhaps in the world. So how does it work? We work through an executive committee at the national level that then spins out some committees and working groups, and then the delegates go back to their states and run what are basically state level extension disaster education network programs. The funding for all of this happens through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Food and Agricultural Defense Initiative, or FADI, which I think is an unfortunate acronym, and certainly I don't use it very often because it's a little weird, but that's the source of the funding for Eden. But what's good about the fact that it comes from that USDA funding is that we as a university don't have to pay to be a member, because those dollars are coming from larger allocations. But states like Cornell, New York do have to commit some support to travel for at least one delegate to attend the annual meeting. And we do that via our competitive funding internally. So what kind of programs does Extension Disaster Education Network actually do? And these are some things that I hope you'll find some interest in. These are competencies that I believe only we have. The Extension Disaster Education Network is uniquely situated to have the Animal Agro Security and Emergency Management course and program. We also have a community capacity building for drought response program. We have a large family preparedness program. We have a program called Ready Business, which is specifically for agricultural and natural resource producers. We have a couple of projects happening right now, one of which is this SCAP program, the Strengthening Community Agri-Security Preparedness. And another one there that's not listed is a cyber program having to do with agri-security and cyber networks. And then we have pretty regular conferences and workshops, which you are all invited to, on food protection, on animal agri-security. And then of course, there's the annual meeting, which is mostly for extension educators, extension executive directors like Barbara and others to attend and get up to speed on what the latest science is in the space of extension disaster education. One of the signature programs right now is the Strengthening Community Agri-Security Preparedness Program. This was developed back in 2008. It's still being used today. The funding was provided by USDA NIFA, and it is an incredible local program that if there's interest, we can come roll out and do either in your county or a handful of counties that are geographically near one another in order to develop this sort of community agri-security preparedness mindset or posture. So if there's interest in that by members of the committees that are represented on this call and or Barbara, just let me know and we can have a conversation about going forward with that. How does it work here in New York? The first thing you need to know is that when a disaster strikes, myself and a small team of colleagues at Cornell and Ithaca will assemble what is called DART. This is the Disaster All Hazards Response Team. We quickly size up based on the best reporting we can get from the National Weather Service, the Department of Military and Naval Affairs, Ag and Markets, and other state agencies. What are we actually dealing with? How widespread will it be? And what resources might be required? Once the Disaster All Hazards Response Team is assembled, and that does include the Dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences and the Director of Cooperative Extension who follow this based on my recommendations. We then either send out small communications to local events, small localized events, or larger communications to regions or states using the New York Extension Disaster Education Network. All of those things, DART and the New York Extension Disaster Education Network, are rolled up under this larger program called the All Hazards Preparedness Response Education Program, which is one of the many programs that are under Cornell Cooperative Extension. You're probably more familiar with the 4-H program or the horse program or the beef cattle program, but the APREP program is another one that if you're not familiar with, I hope you'll be familiar with it by the end of tonight. So we serve as a multiplier of that national extension disaster education network in the state. So when there's something, for example, in the horse sector, we had some challenges around Hurricane Sandy in terms of what happens when pastures are inundated for a period of time with salt water, feed questions, other questions. Well, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here in New York if we don't immediately have experience with that, because we can look at, as I mentioned, all of those other states and their land grant universities and their cooperative extension systems to suss out what's the best approach, what's the best science on this, and we can work together as a team to come up with fact sheets and get those distributed, get them checked out by New York State Ag and Markets, and work in partnership with them to push those resources out. So that's one way we act, and that's as a multiplier. We also manage our state-centric sort of New York Eden website and social media, which I hope you'll become familiar with. We do act as a supporting agency when a disaster strikes. We are the partner agency, we being Cornell University Cooperative Extension, in Emergency Support Function 11 alongside New York State Ag and Markets. Whenever the Disaster Emergency Operations Center is stood up and ESF, Emergency Support Function 11, that being Agriculture and Natural Resources, is going to be a part of the story, we're there. I'm either in the Situation Room in person or I'm zoomed in, depending on what kind of a situation it is and whether I can travel. So that's another benefit that the Extension Disaster Education Network has for you in your county and in your operation. And then, of course, there's the training and exercise opportunities that we host and that we disseminate statewide and regionally and even in counties, should you be interested. One other thing that we do is disaster situation reporting. What this is the step before the USDA Farm Service Agency gets involved in a disaster declaration. So in order for them to know what's really happening out there on the ground, they rely on Cornell Cooperative Extension's unique expertise. There is no other organization that has the same kind of handle on how many farms, what's their name, how many animals do they actually have, what are the challenges that they experience outside of a disaster, how bad will this disaster hurt them given those challenges. Nobody is better prepared to answer those kinds of questions and have boots on the ground awareness across this state than Cooperative Extension. So Cooperative Extension is leaned on in the event of some sort of an emergency or disaster to give that first snapshot, that sort of windshield survey of what's going on, who's in trouble, what do you think the resources are that we're going to need? And we use that information in the emergency support function to be able to forecast for USDA Farm Service Agency. Looks like it's going to be this magnitude of disaster with these sorts of needs that are going to need to be met. So if you hear from your Cornell Cooperative Extension Ag educator in a period of disaster looking for a snapshot of what's happening on your farm, please give them as complete information as you can. And that does help the larger process of a disaster declaration and then sort of the remuneration and compensation that comes along, sometimes weeks, sometimes months later. There's plenty of examples of our doing that. I got pretty involved in all of this right around Hurricane Irene and Lee time. We sort of reinvented New York Eden at that time, moved it from sort of a clearinghouse of brochures to a very active and engaged entity to include the Disaster All Hazards Response Team. And that was in response to some dissatisfaction, frankly, among Cooperative Extension and producers on how nimble we were as a system to help them in their time of need. So we've evolved and adapted a lot since 2011 to the system that we have today, which I will hopefully be able to demonstrate to you in your particular industries how that's relevant to you. Hurricane Sandy was particularly challenging, not only because of what was happening in the urban environment, but on Long Island and elsewhere. There were many sort of challenges in the ag and natural resources sector that people didn't really think of on first blush, but were significant. And it was an opportunity for us to demonstrate as a land grant university how we were valuable, not only out in the upstate or Western New York, but also in the New York City environs when it came to urban agriculture, community gardens, and all kinds of other things. And I'd be happy to share those lessons with you should you be interested. We did have more significant flooding in 2018. You all are familiar with that. We also had we had a number of short pop-up storms throughout the state in 2019 and 2020. We had a pretty significant drought back in 2019, 2020. And then we've had COVID to contend with, where Cooperative Extension and Eden have played a very important and upfront role in order to help the entire industry, both the agriculture and the forestry and natural resources industry, shift to this changing climate that is going to be required in terms of a workplace and information flow and resource flow in the COVID and post-COVID environment. So we've had our hands full. We've had an opportunity to adapt and evolve under all of that. And hopefully what that means is that you have a high-speed program that you can rely on at the local level, at Westchester County Cornell Cooperative Extension level, that will provide you the sort of resources, information, and be nimble enough to assemble those things and get them to you in a timely fashion to be communicated to your business and your colleagues. So how do we do that? How do we disseminate some of that stuff? Well, we use our websites, we use social media, and we use this Ag Sentinel tool, which is an internal intranet as opposed to internet. So a couple of things for you to jot down. There is a National Extension Disaster Education Network, but I think you are going to be best served to focus on the local one, and I'm going to show that in just a second. But before I do, grab this email address. This is mine. I am the director of this program, and myself or my staff will always be very fast to respond to you if you have questions. Obviously, your local questions are going to be better targeted to Barbara and her ag educators. But if there's a question that you want to leapfrog that process, it's an open door policy, and I'm happy to answer questions if you want to shoot those emails to me. So keep track of that. I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint real quick, and I'm going to show you what you need to know about the websites. So let's see if I can move this. The first one is our Facebook page. So for those of you that use Facebook, here it is, facebook.com/cce.ny.eden. That's our Facebook page. I will send out in the chat later the Twitter address, and then the other one I would like for you to know about is the main one, and that is the actual website for Cornell Cooperative Extension's New York Extension Disaster Education Network, and that is eden.cce.cornell.edu. So now the question really is, how could you use this? Now that you've got all this background, it sounds elaborate, like somebody put some work into it. Well, how do you use it? Well, I think there's two ways. One is as a general sort of clearinghouse of information that is existing and is collated, that currently exists. And let's just give you an example. I'm hovering over topics, and there's a little drop-down menu of agro-security, families and pets, infectious diseases, natural hazards, security, other hazards, and preparedness and recovery. If you have questions around any of these, I would say your first resource would be to go here and see what you can learn. So let's check around preparedness and recovery. Scroll down here a little bit. This is some basic background around preparedness and recovery, a number of resources for you here. A number of general resources around relief and recovery. But let's say you've gone here and you're like, nope, I'm not finding what I need to find around getting ready for an imminent hurricane, and I have a horse boarding operation that's large. Okay, so we may have that on our website under families and pets or agro security. If you can probably see that there's an additional drop-down menu there under agro security that has to do with animals. But in the event that we don't have that, have something that's ready for you to get off the website, this is what I think is the best part about Eden. You can simply say to Barbara, there's not a fact sheet that we can find on how to get our horse operation ready to go in case of a windstorm, or they're calling for a major snowfall like we had 2 years ago that collapsed barn roofs. What do we do? What we pride ourselves on is being very, very proactive and nimble, and being able to either already have a fact sheet basically ready upon warning, or develop one and disseminate it within 24 hours of the request. So an example of that, there was a snow issue, and maybe some of you remember this, where it was just an amazing amount of snowfall, and it was a very heavy, very wet snowfall that was threatening to collapse barn roofs all over the state. And there was very little, if any, guidance anywhere on what people were supposed to do about that. Well, we quickly understood that challenge and responded to some requests for further information. I gathered a team of engineers and agricultural experts and barn builders. And within 24 hours, we had fact sheets on not only how you recognize that your roof is stressed, we also had fact sheets about what to do if your barn roof has already collapsed or about to collapse, what you do with your animals, what if it, what a fact sheet on what to do if the barn has actually collapsed and you have animals in distress. And I think probably most importantly, we also developed a fact sheet on how do you safely and properly get the snow off your roof to not only save the roof, but save whatever's under the roof. That's just one example of how the New York Extension Disaster Education Network can work for you as a producer in your local county. The way that would have worked is you would have simply called up Barbara or her agriculture educator and said, here's the need. And she would use the channels that she has to communicate with me almost instantaneously to say, here's the needs. And we would start to work on that. And again, this isn't just anybody being asked or the sheriff's department being asked about what to do about snow load on a barn roof. This is a hive mind, if you will, of all the best and brightest in all the land grant universities and ag colleges in the United States, all working together very quickly with the best science available to provide you resources and solutions in either before, during, or after all phases of the disaster cycle. So I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions about what Extension Disaster Education Network is as a network and as a resource. And if I can answer those questions, I will. And then we'll spend a little more time before we finish up talking about the specifics of some of the things that you may be facing in Westchester County, especially in the horse industry, but also in the maple or the fruit or Christmas tree areas, if there are things that we can talk about in specific. Are there any questions broadly about the Extension Disaster Education Network? And if there aren't any, that's okay. Okay, I see Patricia's now mic is open. Were you going to ask a question? Maybe not. All right. So let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about the specifics. So in the case of Westchester County, you have a pretty significant horse industry there, both in the ag side of things, as well as in the broader sort of equine industry there, which, as we all know, is crosses over into a number of other areas besides traditional agriculture. So one of the things that I think is great about Eden, especially New York Eden, is that we have partnerships. How many of you have seen the American Association of Equine Practitioners disaster planning document? Anybody seen this? Let's go over this if we haven't been familiar with it. This is something that I think is an example of how we can find best management practices and also some of the expertise and work with them in our own equine program as well as our veterinarian program to plan for and then respond to these large scale events. So this is Dr. Zimmo, who's from Florida. There is a number of steps that are recommended, I guess, before a storm or before an event that you probably all are familiar with. But just to be sure we're being thorough, clearly you've got to handle the vaccination, the coggins, the health certificates, the IDing of each horse, which I think is important. They recommend that each horse be identified with at least one, if not all, of these three things. The leather halter with name in a Ziploc bag secured to the halter with duct tape, luggage tag with the horse farm name and phone number braided into the tail, and photos of each horse as proof of ownership. So that's triple redundancy that they're recommending there, which I think is important. Obviously, you need to have an evacuation plan, whether that's for flooding, whether that's for snow, whether that's for fire, whether that's for wind damage. Evacuation plans should be in place and rehearsed. Remember that no plan is any good if you've never seen it before or you've never practiced it. So they should be in place and rehearsed. And there are a number of pointers here, for example, in this disaster planning for horse farms, having to do with electric lines, trees with shallow roots, dealing with fencing, especially in a storm environment, and obviously the hazards of barbed wire or electric fence during a storm when animals may panic. And also, we don't have a big problem with fire ants and snakes like they do in Florida, but you need to think about what are the other knock-on effects or unintended consequences of some of the way you may direct traffic, especially animal traffic, in the event of a storm. Think those things through. I've already heard a number of people talk about water earlier in our introductions. This is really key. This can become a major limiting factor very, very quickly when each horse needs 12 to 20 gallons per day stored. So that's a lot of storage, even if you have half a dozen horses. If you're into tens of horses, you've got to have a lot of water available to you, and you need to be able to move it without electricity potentially. So a lot of planning needs to go in there. There are in these each of these sections, there are some suggestions for how you might do this. And I hope if you I'll tell you what I can do. I'm going to make sure and grab this URL for you all, and I'll send it in the chat so you don't have to try to squint your eyes and see what that URL is. There's some other information here that I think is important, having to do with feed storage is pretty obvious, but the securing of movable objects. These things can be the hazards that can make or break your plan if you didn't think about them. Hallways need to be
Actually,
clear.
I didn't have pasta last night.
Say again?
Oh, Patty, can you mute yourself? Thank you.
Things like jumps in lawn furniture or other decorative stuff that can sometimes find their way into our breezeways and hallways and horse barns probably need to be secured at all times, but certainly when there's going to be some sort of a hazard. And your emergency transport vehicles, like your horse trailers and so forth, need to be away from where things might be able to fall on them during a hazard period. So moving those out into the open field is generally a good idea. Keeping in mind, though, that you want to protect them from the windiest portions of open fields so that you still have access to them when you need them. There are all the considerations around electricity. And then there's this whole business around emergency first aid, not only for you and other humans, but also for your animals. We have a whole section in the Extension Disaster Education Network New York pages around animal health, having to do with animal first aid. And in the event that that information isn't thorough or comprehensive enough, we have an incredible veterinary system at Cornell that works directly hand in hand with us during an emergency should you have questions. And the pathway to those resources, again, is Barbara, is Cornell Cooperative Extension in Westchester County, and that will be a direct line to those resources for you in the event that you need them. It's also important to think through all these emergency tools that some people may not think about assembling and prepping and testing prior to, if you have advance warning, like you might with a hurricane or a big snowstorm, prior to the arrival of that hazard, like the chainsaw, like your fence repair materials. Where are all those things? Where are the cutters and pry bars and things that you need? Where are your fire extinguishers? And when's the last time they were inspected, and are they ready to go? And will they function in a cold environment below zero, for example? And then I think probably one of the areas that gets overlooked the most is if you survive all of that fun during an event, a disaster or a hazard, what are you ready to do after the event, after the storm? What are some of the things that you need to be prepared to do, and how do you do the record keeping for that? For example, here, the recommendations around inspecting horses for injuries to eyes and limbs, walking the pasture to remove debris. We had a situation a couple years ago where our entire major the biggest barn that we have, which is an old dairy barn, big hip roof barn, the entire metal roof blew off. And not only did all the metal blow off, but all the hardware that fastened all that blew off. And so we spent literally weeks with metal detectors and magnets trying to police up all that extra metal in the field. And then we ended up having to rent a machine that was about 8 feet wide that you pull behind a tractor with a really heavy duty magnet. And it was amazing how much additional stuff we pulled up after thinking that we had it all covered with our handheld metal detectors and magnets. So, planning for those kinds of things requires a much deeper dive than often people initially think. And if you don't rehearse your plans are not very good. So remember that rehearsal component. Obviously, there's some recommendation here to do things like take pictures of storm damage and so forth. You all are familiar with that for insurance purposes, and what to do if your horse is missing and so forth. Now, why did I walk us through this? Well, partly because maybe there's some information here that's new to you or that you'll find useful, but I think more importantly to demonstrate the kind of easy reference, quick reference sorts of resources that would be available to you on the Extension Disaster Education Network social media platforms or websites. And in the event that you needed to go deeper on any one of these topics, that's the point at which you would be welcome to work through Barbara and Westchester County Cornell Cooperative Extension to mine the expertise of all of these scientists and researchers in the College of Ag and Life Sciences to develop the appropriate fact sheets or responses to your question. There was also some discussion in our introductions about maple. Maple is one of these industries that is pretty prone and vulnerable to a particular kind of hazard or disaster. And generally speaking, we're talking about electrical disruptions and major wind events. There is an increasing interest in our Cornell Maple program in resilience and readiness in the maple industry. So I know, Bri, I think it was you that had a pretty significant amount of acreage and trees in maple. I don't know if you're familiar with that maple program or what's going on with both the RNOT program and the Adirondack program, but that whole area of resilience and readiness for storms, disaster ready, is an area that we're looking for volunteers in production to help us develop best management practices. Basically, we have, Ready Farm and Ready Ag, but we don't have Ready Maple. So what we want to do is develop, best management practices for the maple industry. Maple is a big deal in New York and Vermont and New Hampshire and many other northern states. And we want to be working to lead the way in terms of readiness as, let's just face it, the storms aren't getting less severe. The storms are definitely getting more frequent, and the storms are costing more money. So we need to be ready for those kinds of things and develop a posture of resilience to the extent that we can. The only other area that I am aware that there's some interesting things happening that might be of salience to this group is our extension director, Chris Watkins, is a fruit expert. That's where he came from. And he's mostly an apple guy, but he's pretty conversant in all fruits, to include stone fruits. So if there is interest and you feel like in the fruit domain, there's not enough information or disaster preparedness or response information, that would be another area to utilize Cornell Cooperative Extension's Eden program to develop more resources for you to have a proactive, resilient approach to all hazards, not just weather events, but other events that may befall us too, like power outages that are caused by other reasons. We drill often around nuclear threats and plumes, which can have pretty significant impacts on our agricultural productivity. And Westchester County is not excluded from that, given the proximity of some places and the changing winds, proximity of some nuclear power generating facilities. So we have a couple of open areas that I'm glad that there are some people on this call that could perhaps work with Barbara to influence, how we go forward in terms of developing more readiness resources and so forth in your particular areas of agriculture and natural resources production.
Keith, can I add something apropos what you just said regarding different types of disasters and particularly with crop farms? We have in our Westchester office 2 people who are experts in pest management. And that's something that also affects many of the fruit farms and the vegetable farms. We often get calls, something is eating at the crops, something is, we've got damage to the soils, whatever it is. So do feel free to call us.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And the integrated pest management and other pest management programs at Cornell are increasingly having to deal in the space that I live in, which is disaster and all hazards, because the number of growing days is changing, the amount of moisture that we have is changing, soil temperatures are changing, and therefore the whole complex of pests is changing in New York. And so, the only way we can know how to deal with that is to know what's actually happening. And only way we can know that is through you, the producers, working with your Cornell Cooperative Extension, ag educators, and your Farm Service Agency people and your soil and water people to communicate that. And that's what the Extension Disaster Education Network is for, is to be a liaison. The last thing I want to say before I open it up to questions, and we're at 10 minutes before the hour, it looks like, is that I have mentioned a couple of times the New York State Department of, the Department of Ag and Markets. New York State Department of Ag and Markets has one person in that whole agency whose job it is to worry about hazards and natural disasters. His name is Paolo. He has, and his predecessor have recognized the very unique value of you all and your relationship with Cooperative Extension and Cooperative Extension's relationship with the College of Ag and Life Sciences and the College of Human Ecology. Because that sort of triune, if you will, of relations is a leverage point that Paolo at Ag and Markets would otherwise be blind to. He would not have the visibility or the operational capability to understand what's going on at the local level, at the granularity that you all provide, you, the producers, and your relationship with your Ag Enhancement Board, your Ag Protection Board, your Cornell Cooperative Extension Association and Board, etc. So we have just entered into a new memorandum of understanding with the Department of Ag and Markets as the Emergency Support Function 11, which is the whole area around agriculture, natural resources, and historical preservation, to be their first stop shop. So we are in direct partnership with them. I hope that's good news for all of you. I don't want to get into the weeds about what these emergency support functions actually are, but one thing I can tell you is you can imagine them as portals or pathways to the larger dollars in the whole disaster management and disaster payment process, which is big money federally and at the state level. So you now have, because of Cornell Cooperative Extension's role in ESF 11, you now have a direct, besides FSA, another direct route to influence and information exchange in that space. And I hope that's good news. So I wanted to spend this time to do two major things. One was to help you, and hopefully this is comforting news, help you understand how it is that your land-grant university and your Cornell Cooperative Extension Association right there in Westchester County has access to a world-class amount of expertise in the space of disaster management and response and preparation in the agriculture and natural resources sphere. That was object number one. And object number two was to give you a couple of examples and tidbits of how you might utilize those resources, the website, the social media, in your own areas of focus, whether that's equine or maple or what have you. Just hitting the wave tops, which is all we really can do in 45 minutes, 50 minutes, but just to hopefully wet your whistle a little bit on that. Now, what I promised you was that in the chat, I would give you the URL, and I'm going to do that now. I think I can. Can I do that to everybody? It looks like I need to send it to you, Barbara, and you send it out. So I've sent the URL to Barbara, who can share it to the whole group for the horse health disaster planning form. And I will also send out the New York State Eden information, and Barbara can share that more broadly after this call. So I want to thank you all for listening today and engaging with me and those introductions also. I thank you all for your continued support of Cooperative Extension at the local level. And I would love to answer any questions or entertain a conversation or comment about anything that we've covered here in the next few minutes that we have. And I'm happy to hang with y'all for as long as you want. Jan, do you have your hand up? David has his hand up. Jan's hand's up, but maybe she's not aware. Go ahead, David.
Oh, great. Yeah, I had a few questions for you, particularly since since we're right in the process of, wrapping up our hazard mitigation plan for FEMA. We got a lot of pressure to include climate change, or at least in whatever fashion we could. I know FEMA, it's not a distinct category that FEMA wants to see in these all natural hazard plans, but we do discuss it, particularly with respect to flooding, emerging issues like wildfire as well, with the the potential for drought, extensive periods of drought, dead wood in forests from, disease or other vectors. We could wind up in a situation where wildfire becomes an issue as well. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and what resources might be available to help counties like ours you develop, actionable items where we can start to do something more than just talk about some of these issues.
Okay, I appreciate the question very much. So there's two parts to the answer. The first is sort of the applied answer, and that is that there is a pretty vibrant climate change and agriculture team at Cornell Cooperative Extension on campus, and they're doing climate mitigation work, they're doing climate smart stewards work, and other sorts of practical, hands-on education and mitigation kinds of activities, many of which are either NYSERDA or otherwise funded or complementary, that you could use almost like Legos that snap into your existing plans pretty easily. And I'd be happy to get into the weeds with you on those, David, offline with Barbara and other members of our team. So that's an easy one. We can do that. There's a lot we can provide, especially if you're developing plans and annexes to plans. The second piece of the puzzle is more broadly, we being Cooperative Extension and Eden should be thought of as a repeater station. So whenever you're trying to figure out how are we going to get the message out to stakeholders around agricultural emergency preparedness, response, and recovery, then we are your best tool for that. There really isn't a better boots on the ground sort of network of people that are plugged into the agricultural scene at the local level than Cooperative Extension. Beyond that, I think in terms of writing in your plan, taking that, going full circle with as a repeater station to your stakeholders in your county, but also the other direction to the state and even the feds, because we're a land grant university and we're directly plugged into USDA NIFA and we're plugged into the New York Department of Ag and Markets. So we're a kind of facilitator and liaison conduit that you can write into your plans on top of those sort of more applied stuff around climate change or pest management that Barbara mentioned, or other sorts of sort of de jour issues that belong to the larger suite of potential hazards you might face and have to mitigate.
Great. That's very helpful, because I think we'll probably start drafting up some type of an operational mitigation strategy in that respect. Following up on that, I was wondering if or what resources might be provided post-disaster to the agricultural community in seeking grant funding for repair work and things that might have, damage that might have occurred.
Yeah, so we have
other impacts. I think some of the things that we've heard as well is, my winter feed got, destroyed or something like that from something like that.
So we have the standard sort of suite of, here are the responses that we have kind of collated and ready to issue. And we tailor these to whatever the event is, but generally speaking, it's the same 7 or 8 approaches pretty much regardless, with 1 or 2 additional things that are nuanced because of the particular hazard that's occurred. Beyond that, though, there is also a much more highly tailored response depending on what the unique situation is. So there have been cases where in the drought, certain areas of the state were heavily hit with a complete loss and lack of forage. So we, Cornell Cooperative Extension, worked hand in glove with Farm Bureau to develop a hay exchange, a forage exchange. And it was county planners and county cooperative extension working with their county Farm Bureau folks. And we all 3 together came up with the forage. We were able to create a resource exchange that was equitable and get forage to the places that didn't have it. And it also helped those producers who might have had a surplus, and there was no price gouging and everybody got along. And it was, it was a great example of collaboration that we'd like to see in a hazard environment or post-hazard environment. That's one example. Similarly, we've seen there was, because of the snowstorm, the Big Buffalo storm in Western New York, there were some challenges around milk storage and milk dumping and those kinds of things. We were able to broker, again, because of who we are as Cornell Cooperative Extension and our county associations, the strength of their leadership, the fact that people know who they are and trust them. We've been around over 100 years. We were able to broker relationships between counties and between municipalities to be able to disperse those many, many milk trucks in ways that were not going to cause people to get violations for water quality or other dumping, and solve those problems. But they're very unique to that specific disaster or hazard, and also very unique to whatever the circumstances around that are. So I think that the point there, David, is that we have the ability to shift focus, plug in and engage with the particular problem that's happening locally or regionally, and then bring to bear all that sort of resource that comes from a world-renowned agricultural university and a national system that is, oh, by the way, plugged into USDA to help solve problems.
Great, and that actually is a really good segue to my third question, which was to what extent you get involved in the food supply system. So say after a natural disaster, so either from the demand or the supply side, say for whatever reason, farmers were looking, had this excess or couldn't properly store it because of, generator capacity or whatever it might be, just getting the food out to where it's needed. And then also, on the demand side is, post disaster, making sure the food supply systems are, secure and get back up and running as quickly as possible.
If we had situations like that, and this is probably relevant for everybody on the call, so that you know what goes on. If there was a situation like that, your emergency support function 11, ESF 11 team would be huddled in the emergency operations center in Albany. And that ESF 11 team would grow every day to accommodate whatever the needs were, whatever kind of think tank environment was needed to solve what was a looming problem. We, all as disaster managers can sort of see ahead a little bit and, all right, we're going to have a major problem with milk here in about 3 days or whatever. Maple is another good example where storage becomes a problem very, very quickly. So what happens is the ESF 11 team then reaches out to whatever resources it has. And if we've got smart people in the College of Ag and Life Sciences or Ag Engineering Department or wherever, logistics experts, that's what we do. We reach into those networks. And that's the beautiful thing. I continue to evangelize about how awesome Cornell Cooperative Extension is because it actually has tendrils into every single department and all that faculty at Cornell University to help solve those problems. So that little ESF 11, Ag and Natural Resources Support Function 11 team is huddling in the Emergency Ops Center, probably working with whatever county's emergency operations folks to come up with some problem solving. And that to me is, I can't tell you specifics because it changes for every one of those situations, but that huddle is your ace in the hole, that fact that that's happening.
Okay, great. And actually then just a follow up to that, this is really more for Barbara. Barbara, you're part of the EOC when they activated here in Westchester, right?
Right.
So that would be our conduit to the EOC in Albany.
And to that point, and that's a great segue to Barbara, and maybe Barbara has something to add for this, but we are moving towards doing more training for executive directors so they are familiar with and comfortable in that role in the Emergency Operations Center as, generally wearing the ag hat, but not only, because we also have youth and family expertise, and we also have, youth 4-H programs that are part. So there are other levels of expertise that the cooperative extension can bring to the table in the Emergency Operations Center at the county level as well. And we recognize that not every extension executive director is comfortable or even competent in that role. And we're working on addressing that right now with a statewide training. Are there other questions? Thank you, David, for that series of interesting and engaged questions. And I appreciate that you're thinking about nuts and bolts and how to operationalize all this. Any other questions or comments? Barbara, anything that you want to add to what I've said?
No, I'm just thinking that I've taken the various Eden trainings and I intend to continue to do them. They're very, very valuable. I'm also thinking I'm going to be getting together again with our local OEM people, and we'll talk some more about doing things at the local level. But I wonder, you mentioned the fact sheets, And we pass them out all the time, and people find them incredibly valuable. If a problem comes up and anyone on this call feels that they cannot find a fact sheet, please do reach out to our office, because we'll work with Keith and all the appropriate people on campus to try to get one made for you. You know, we have a unique agricultural program in Westchester. We're equine, but we're not breeders. You know, we're boarders, you know, show, that sort of thing, training. And most of what I've seen around the state has to do with the breeders. So if you come up against a problem that you can't find the solution, please do reach out to us at Cooperative Extension in Westchester. We're in Elmsford, and let us do some legwork for you.
Yes, I'll echo that. I'm happy. Our staff is ready to go to develop those tailor-made solutions whenever requested. And we make it a point to try to turn those around between 24 and 48 hours, if at all possible.
Well, Keith, if there are questions that come up after this call and I receive them, I will forward them on to you. And I hope everybody will certainly have a good evening and think about, you know, one of the most important things that Keith mentioned is have a plan. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be simple. It can be whatever is appropriate for your property and for your farm, but have a plan and be prepared and rehearse that plan, because the most important and most successful emergency plans are the ones where people have done the rehearsal ahead of time and where all your employees and your family members know what the plan is.
Yes, I concur. And I would also remind folks that I see hands up again, but maybe they're just accidentally up. Barbara, that I sent to you in the chat, the Twitter channel, that is generally our most, when there's a disaster happening, it's pretty quiet when there's not something going on, maybe a post every week or so. But when something is going on, that's where most of our guidance is put out. And we'll be, if it's a big problem that's going to have long lasting effects and people are going to need resources over the long haul, we will be posting on that sometimes hourly, sometimes a couple times a day. So follow that Twitter and also follow that Facebook page if you use social media. Otherwise, you can subscribe to the web page for updates as well. There is a function to put out updates via the web page itself. And Barbara, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with your constituents and stakeholders there in Westchester County. I'm not sure whether these hands I'm seeing are actually questions, but if they are, Michael, do you have a question?
I do. I would like to receive the literature on the snow load. I did have an event at the farm probably when I first arrived there, purchased it like 25 years ago, where a truss failed in a heavy wet snowfall, and on that same day 2 indoor rings in Westchester County collapsed, and I was lucky that mine did not, and I had to do a structural repair to the truss system. And actually this fall I spoke with my architect, and we're going to do have a structural engineer come in to review the indoor ring. And so you mentioned there was some literature about how to tell when these things happen, and you know that's can happen. It takes a heavy wet snow, and it can happen.
Yeah, there's a couple of different important ways to remove snow from a big roof. You know, the wrong ways obviously cause collapses. The right ways distribute weight and remove the weight in ways that keep things from being out of equilibrium. So I've just sent to to Barbara, the website where all that information lives on our Eden site. It's under our winter storms section. And then when you go on that, she might be able to push that out for all of you in the chat. Hopefully you can see that. When you get that link in the chat, just click on it and save that URL. If you scroll down there, there'll be a section that says barns and barn roofs. It's in there that those fact sheets about roof strength, trusses, all that kind of stuff, how to remove snow properly, slowly, and with grids and all that, so that you preserve your roof. That's all in that page that Barbara just sent out to everybody just now.
Okay, and Patty was up there with her hand up. She probably has a question too. Well, thank you very much. This has been a very good presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate your being here tonight.
Thank
And
you.
like I said, get a hold of Barbara or me anytime if there's further questions.
I think you may have already answered my question, but what I'm on the aspect of having plans and preparedness, if it's overwhelming to think about how many disasters that we do need to prepare for, and are there some practical, like last year I had the fire guy come out and check all my and replace whatever extinguishers needed to be replaced, and made sure I had enough of them in the proper spots. But just are there some sort of practical fact sheets that help a barn owner just get ahead of the curve a little bit, so that all the beyond making the to-go kit or whatever, is that on your website as well?
There are some things on that's a great question. I appreciate it. There are some things that are on the website. There are some fact sheets that we developed 5 years or 4 years ago when we were expecting a pretty busy tornado season, that are maybe not up there for barns in particular, that I can go see about. And I'm going to have to ask you, Barbara, to send me a note to remind me to go dig for those tomorrow when I'm back at the office on campus. So good question. That was Patricia that asked that, right?
Yes, and thank you so much for this seminar. It's really great. It's overwhelming, but really, really great.
I apologize for the overwhelming part, but I'm glad that you found some things that you can latch onto and use, and I will definitely follow up with you on there's ready.gov has their make a plan. It's a campaign really of make a plan, but we are working on an analog or a parallel to that make a plan for farms and barns. So let me find out where we are with that and send you that information. We'll send it out to this whole group when I get to the fact sheets.
That's great. Thank you so much. Because when you get Mike's barn has 50 to 100 horses, and I've got 30 horses, and it's a little overwhelming to try to think of how to keep them all safe.
Yes.
Thank you.
A good challenge to drive into in the new year. I'm excited to talk about our equine folks on campus, and maybe we can come up with some best management practice guide or something on that.
That would be great. Thank you. Looks like Mike's hand is up again.
Mike, did you have another question? Nope, hand went down.
Yeah, it went down. No.
Well, like I said, I'm happy to hang around, but if y'all are what we say in the military, rounds complete, that's fine too. Like I said, Barbara, I really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with your stakeholders, and thank you so much for the invitation. And I hope that we can continue the conversation with this unique, you've got a unique tableau of things going on in your ag and natural resources sector there that should be appreciated and prioritized for us at Cornell. So I look forward to continuing that conversation with you and your stakeholders.
Thanks so much, Keith, and thank you for taking the time tonight to do this for us. And, as I said, we're not a traditionally agricultural county, but we do have the same problems as others. So thank you. And to everybody who took the time out of their busy schedules to be with us tonight, we are very pleased that you did, and we hope you learned something from this. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. So have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you all. Good night. Happy New Year.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. This was really terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.